I'm Jason Sisney of the Legislative Analyst Office. Each November, our office releases a multi-year forecast of the condition of California's general fund budget. This year, our forecast shows that the state needs to address a $25 billion budget problem in the next few months before it passes a 2011-12 state budget plan, and it shows a roughly $20 billion annual budget problem for the next several years. Our budget forecast begins with our economists and analysts taking an independent look at California's economy and state revenues. This year, as in recent years, our forecast is dominated by the state's recovery from the recession that began in 2007 and ended in 2009. While the recession ended in 2009, the recovery, both here in California and around the country, has been very slow, much slower than in some prior recessions. And in fact, our forecast of California's economic recovery over the next several years is a little bit weaker in this forecast than it has been in some recent forecasts released by our office. This graphic shows the projected track of U.S. gross domestic product growth over the next several years, between 2 and 3% annually in most years. And this is considerably weaker, as I mentioned, than some prior recoveries. Since 2007, California has lost 1.4 million jobs, about 9%, a worse rate of job loss than the rest of the country. Our forecast expects some small net gains in employment beginning in 2011 that should slowly bring the unemployment rate in the state down below 12% as calendar year 2011 progresses. What's causing the slow recovery? The slow recovery is caused by a huge inventory of excess residential and commercial real estate. Businesses and individuals remain reluctant to spend, and confidence in the economy is weak. And because of the drop in asset prices, housing prices, and stock prices in recent years, individuals and firms have a lot less capacity to invest and spend in the economy. This figure shows the track of taxable sales in California, just as an example, as a percent of personal income. As you can see, taxable sales measured this way have declined significantly in recent years as the economy has dropped, employment has dropped, and as credit has tightened, and the tight credit situation remains a factor in our forecast. Our office uses our economic forecast to produce a revenue outlook for the state for the next several years. And the slow recovery means that the state's revenue track looks somewhat soft as well. California general fund revenues are particularly influenced by capital gains. Capital gains are growth in asset prices that show up in the state's personal income tax, its largest source of revenue. In our forecast, as you can see here, capital gains do not recover much over the next several years. Capital gains are particularly hard to forecast, this year perhaps more so than usual, for two reasons. First, during the last several years, there have been such large drops in stock prices, housing prices, and other assets that there are a lot of losses that taxpayers still have to realize that will depress capital gains revenues for the state for the next several years. And it's very hard to forecast exactly when the stock market will go up or down and when taxpayers will take some of those losses. In addition, federal tax policy will influence when taxpayers take and realize capital gains or losses. The Congress currently is considering whether to extend or not various tax cuts that were put in place under the prior presidential administration. And Congress's decision on what to do with some of these tax cuts can influence the timing of hundreds of millions of dollars of capital gains in our forecast. In addition, recent corporate tax changes enacted by the legislature have meant more revenue for the state in the last few years, but will mean less revenue for the state over the next several years, and that is reflected in our forecast. And adding to the state's challenges in terms of the budget deficit is the end of a temporary measure that increased several taxes temporarily through 2010-11. As you can see from this figure, about $8 billion of temporary tax increases will expire by the end of 2010-11. And that's one of the factors explaining the very large budget problem that the state faces in 2011-12.